The number one thing to determine who is the sheep is if you don't know who the sheep are, you may be the sheep. How to trade the news. You want to figure out how you can understand what people are thinking. Well, the number one step to that is people are stupid. The amount of shit that I've seen in my life, I mean, literally stuff that is not in their interest. I watched some dude run across multiple lanes of 50-mile-an-hour cars, just boo, 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 and he's fucking Frogger going across the highway. And guess what he runs into? Not a car, a telephone pole. Okay? You miss all the 2-ton vehicles that spell your imminent fucking death, but you run into a telephone pole, you know, and that thing is like big, you know, it's not tiny, it's like big. Like, how do you mistake this? Oh, and he's looking right at it, and shit like that happened to me all the time when I go to Florida now. It might be a bias, I agree, okay? I can get with you guys. But the reality of the situation is maybe you need to drag your knuckles across the floor, say ooga booga for me, because we need to get into that mindset for you to actually be able to trade with these people. Here are the facts. An average person reading level is 8th to 7th grade or below. That means no complicated words, very little syllables, no more than 3 sentences in a fucking paragraph. You are basically a child at this point, okay? 7th and 8th grade, I think, is 13, right? So the majority of people's understanding is a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old. The same is true with math, which is one of the most essential tools for finance. In 6th grade, only 25% of that population that's in 6th grade nationally is considered proficient in 6th grade math. And the situation doesn't get better as they get older. That means nobody can compound their fucking way out of a paper bag. And if you can, count yourself lucky because you are the 25%. So it's time to realize exactly how crazy it is out there. When I started this stream, okay, there are basic things that I start to teach people about finance. And you know what? It's not your fault because no one teaches finance in public high school. I understand there are some initiatives in certain places, but it's not like a national fucking pattern, okay? They don't teach you how to balance your checkbook. Okay, nobody does that anymore, but you should do the fucking electronic equivalent. Right? Nobody teaches you these things about the difference between an asset and a credit card or resetting of rates or how absolute asset, like finance asset it is to take a loan with 17%. Or a resetting rate. That's criminal, right? But it happens, right? There literally has to be usury laws, right? Because it gets so bad in payday loans. What's a payday loan? Well, you get an advance on your paycheck, right? And the interest rates, because they don't tell you the interest rate, they tell you the amount that you're going to have to pay. So they hide things like 100, 200% returns on your paycheck or interest that they're charging you, right? Again, you think of yourself as a cynical person, but this may not be the reality that you understand about who's on the other side of that trade sometimes in some of these dog shit stocks. Okay? So how to trade the news and the edge that I'm trying to explain to you really only exists in small to medium stocks. Okay? I would say this year it happens even in big companies, even $billions dollar valuations. I'm talking even $100 billion valuations. It even happens in very large companies, right? And you'll get to a point where you can start to sniff it out. All right. So you feel like you've realized that people are sheep. Okay. The number one thing to determine who is the sheep is if you don't know who the sheep are, you may be the sheep. Okay. So we've gone to step one. Let's go into an example of how this happens, right? One thing that you do know this year is that there is an influx of retail traders. Huge amounts. Let's teach you a little bit about people, okay? So let's take an example of how people think. Information dissemination, or how information about a topic happens, is it happens in stages. What happens is you have a population that gets, like, let's say there's facts, fact A, fact B, fact C, right? And people only have a certain amount of time to be able to understand or want to understand it, right? So it only hits a certain amount of the population. And then people decide whether it's important or not. And then as time goes on, it'll disseminate to a larger amount of people, right? The problem is, to know a topic, you need way more time than people are willing to give for a topic. So you get really terrible misunderstandings about things, right? Coupled with the fact that people will not verify information because nobody wants to take the time to do it. And that makes sense because we have limited resources and time is one of them, right? People don't let's take something that we're pretty happy to gain information for another person. Let's say a restaurant recommendation, right? If your friend says, "Oh, you should try that restaurant," right? You what do? You maybe look it up on Google, but do you go to the health department's website and check their health grading the last time they were inspected? Who does that? Nobody does that. Right? So you get a certain impression of a topic. And that's this top, I like to call narrative, right? And beneath each layer of population that gets the different set of facts, whether they're correct or not, gets a different narrative. Okay? So they get this group of people that are more into the topic than you are, have a different set of facts, which may overlap or may not overlap. Okay? So, for example, your friend giving you a restaurant recommendation, you feel pretty safe that they've been there before, they didn't get sick, so you're going to go to that restaurant, right? But the health inspector who's inspected that restaurant has a different take on that restaurant. And while the truth may be that that restaurant is going to has a likelihood of getting you sick. Let's say they got a C on their restaurant, right? The last time it was inspected. You don't want to go to a C restaurant. Okay. This means that they don't maintain the temperatures inside their refrigerators. So the food could spoil, even though it's been put in a refrigerator. Like, it's pretty bad. It could have feces, places, too much rodent activity, shit like that, right? So you don't want to go to a C. But the truth is, in certain jurisdictions, there is 10 to 20% restaurants that are C rated, right? What does that mean? That means you have a chance, if you go to random restaurants, of 2 out of 10 or 1 out of 10 restaurants that you go to could be at a C grade restaurant. You go around the world with this impression that life is fine. But now you have a different impression of how gross restaurants are now that I've informed you, right? I paranoid you a little bit. And that is called information blindness, right? When it's exactly when you watch The Matrix and they said, "Are you going to take the red pill?" Where you're You're going to get a different impression of life as you get to be more informed. The problem is, as this happens, it will become more difficult to trade if you are not in that subsection of that narrative, right? So think of the people that are buying Rivian today, right? They're in a different informational space than maybe people who are saying, and this may or may not be correct. I don't know, okay? The one that I research is Tesla, not Rivian. All I know is that they don't have any deliveries, and they're getting a valuation that is 1/4 the size of Tesla. So you're in a different informational space than if you're trading on the hype, because you know, or you may not have even looked up if they make money. Maybe that's not important to them. 100 billion with 0 sales. What could go wrong, right? Well, we saw that with Nikola. We've been in this space before. The thing is, it doesn't matter if it's correct or not. It's about trading the news and the narrative. And remember that old adage, perception is the truth. And when you are trading the news, this is absolutely true. That sounds hilarious when you say that. No sales and $100 billion valuation. Yeah, I think it's even worse. So let's look at it. And this is not in defense of Tesla. Tesla's valuation is ridiculous too. But, let's see. It's valuation as of right now. Yeah, it's 120 billion right now. Let's see the size of Tesla now that it has moved down. About $1 trillion right now. So that's, 1/10 size. So let's understand how this happens, right? Because this happens to all of us, right? And for some reason, when we are in the low informational state, we make decisions that make perfect sense at the moment. And you'll see that this happens as more people learn, right? So as time goes on, typically the information will disseminate. Let's take a look at something like Nikola, right? That the realities of having a company that's valued at the entire industry may not pan out, right? So you see Nikola went up to $93.99, and now it's centered around 13. It's even hit below its pre-IPO price or pre-SPAC price, which is $10, right? Which is the value of the cash on hand, kind of. And then you have to think of all the money they burned since then, right? So it's a really a fall from grace. So how do you see that you're in this low informational state? Well, let's listen to a scientist who talks about how our knowledge is not derived from facts. It's rather derived from experiences that we have from other people. And that's how we usually get information, right? That's why it's a game of telephone, right? You guys don't actually, most people in here, probably not my chat, but most people who are investing don't actually read SEC filings, right? The numbers are so pathetic. The SEC actually does a report of the number of times that SEC filings are pulled down. Like they can track page views, and it nowhere represents even the amount of institutional investors. I think it was something stupid like 1,000 a month, right? Like on average of all the securities that are out there, right? So what that means is we're not trading on information. We're trading on other people's experiences with a product or whatever narrative that there is out there.
I am going to cure you of your blindness. This is my favorite part. Are you ready to be cured?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go.
It was a snake. None of you motherfuckers said it was a snake. Why? Because you had limited information. And you literally will think the most fucked up determinations about situations.
All right. So now
when you look at it, what do you see? The snake, right? Because you had limited information. Okay? So every time you're on social media thinking one way of a story that is being presented to you, you'll realize that the narrative is always wrong. Who knew that the Matrix, that the movie knew what was happening in our lives, which was we don't know shit. Unless you have hours and hours and hours into a situation, and you may not even understand what that situation is, but we cancel people on a daily basis. We move determinations that happened on a political basis because of our uninformed opinions. We create and destroy lives with our determinations, and yet you're dead fucking wrong because none of you saw a snake. So what I call this is the Ooga Booga method. Okay, so how can you use this information to your advantage? You take that information and you realize how exactly stupid people are, and you follow the narrative. See how people react to new information, and you will get good at understanding how people are going to react to information because it's framed a certain way, okay? So you will start to understand two concepts, which is the narrative and the counter narrative. This narrative you're going to come to with little to no research. What we in this chat love to say is the Ooga Booga method. Why? Because it's a caveman who doesn't give a shit, who has a limited understanding of what's going on, okay? The counter narrative is you're going to do a fuck ton of research, okay? You're going to go to first sources. Now, you can do it in any order that you want. I like to read the narrative, and then I like to go see the research because I like to have that aha moment, just like when the snake comes up, right? I love to have that moment over and over and over again to remind myself of what a fucking idiot I can even be, okay? A lot of people like to call this bias, but I like to call it the narrative and the counter narrative. And somewhere between this distance is where you're going to make a fuck ton of money, right? Because you're going to understand that at some point, the counter narrative hopefully will come and bubble up. And when you start to see hints of that is when you can really start to trade something, because the moves are violent. The moves are even violent in a stock that has a bigger distance between the narrative and the counter narrative. There are many examples of this. Nikola, to me, is my favorite one, right? Because in the beginning, no one thought that a company would take $1 billion. What was its ultimate valuation? I don't even remember, but it was multiple billions of dollars. It represented every car company in the space, in the globe at one point. It was so big, right? And then all of a sudden, a short report comes out saying that they soapbox derbied a truck down a hill, made a video of it, and made it seem like it was a built truck to sell people on the narrative that Nikola was a real company. And these are not disputed facts. The company went out there on their website and said, yes, that was done. Right now, the co-founder of Nikola is accused by the Department of Justice for securities fraud, for lying to the public. And yes, I hold one share of Nikola stock because in the beginning of this, they decided to DMCA creators as a means of controlling the narrative. And if you are a shareholder of Nikola, the company cannot sue you. So yes, I hold one share of Nikola. As part of my disclosure requirements, I have to tell you. You know how I know this? Because it's in the filings. Whether you're trading a stock like this long or you're trading a stock like this short, the narrative and the counter narrative are very important. Remember, and we're just going to end with this, remember that in the short term, the dumbest narrative wins. In the long term, the truth wins.